In this video, I'll cover how to create event definitions in your design for VMware Aria Operations Management Pack Builder. At this point, the design has a request that returns all of our event information we want to have the management pack create into events. So the next step is to create an event definition for those events. So we'll select Add, and that will take us to the event form. The first part is to define what the event definition name is going to be. So what type of event is being fired. In this case, it's kind of a rubric log event. We also need to specify where these events come from. In this case, they come from the event request. And then inside the request from its response, where are these events located? In this case, they come from data.events, and then there's a list of each event. And then the final step for this particular part of the form is to specify where the message comes from. Now, if the response comes back and there is a single attribute for the message, in this case, the rubric one has something called event info, you can just select it here. In this case, the event info field, you can see, has a lot more extra information that really has nothing to do with the message of the event. So we can apply a regex to this. And when we apply a regex to this, we can shorten that down to just the part that we'd want to see in VMware Aria Operations. Let's see how well I type this. Nope. There we go. So in this case, what I've done is I just wanted to pull everything that was inside the message field out into my message. So I'm pulling back, starting with the message, anything that isn't the end of the message. There's many different ways to kind of do this, and this is kind of just a sample. But if we were to kind of evaluate more options here, I think the next thing to think about is if you have multiple attributes you need to use in order to create your message, you can switch over to this advanced view. In this case, what we want to do is get rid of this event info and start the whole thing off with the event type. Now we'll have that context in here with that it's audit. We can also write out that this is the event type for those people who may not see this or know what the context of this when they're looking at it in VMware Aria Operations. And then we can put the actual message after this. We can put the info in again. And again, just shorten up what we're actually returning. Okay, so once we're happy with what we're parsing out from that object as our event message, we can go on to the next step, which is defining all of the severity information about this event. So the first part is to say, where does the severity information come from this API response? And with rubric's case, there is a single attribute that has and contains the severity. The next step is to map the values that come from the API to the VMware Aria Operations severities. So in order to get the full list of these severities, you'll need to use your documentation for the API to see what all can be returned. In this case, we know that via the example, informational returns, and we want to map that to info for VMware Aria Operations. And if we look at the documentation, there are some other cases that I want to include here. And then I'm just going to clean up these other cases. However, it's worth noting the log option here will not be sent into VMware Aria Operations. Instead, it will just be logged to the adapter instance's log file as part of its collection. So if you wanted to see the log information but not necessarily include it, you could do that. And if there were some specific cases that you just wanted to discard all of, we'll come back to that in a second, you can choose a discard option here. And then finally at the bottom, you set a default. So if something comes back and it doesn't map to one of these three, what should the management pack do with it? The default for the management pack builder is to set this to log, but you could technically just set everything to a specific severity if let's say there wasn't a severity field really available on the event and you knew that they were all warning or something like that. But you can additionally also set them to discard too, to say you don't want to even log them and fill up your logs with them. In this case, I'm going to leave it as to log them when they don't match. Once we've covered severity, we now have the option to specify how these events will show up in VMware Aria Operations. Every event that gets created has to be attached to an object. So we can specify object mappings here. So for each object mapping, we're going to specify what the object type is we want this event to be able to be attached to. In this case, like a rubric cluster, we want to attach some events to that when they show up. And when we specify this, we need to specify what on the rubric cluster is going to match what on the API response. So we have a rubric cluster ID, and we can match this to the object ID of the event. And we can do this for the rubric VM as well. And again, it's going to, since these are rubric-specific events and rubric-specific objects, the IDs are just going to match. If we wanted to do something like we did in relationships to make a more complicated matching system, like we did for the vCenter virtual machine, we can do that here as well. And the other thing worth noting is if there is an object that should have events attached to it, but you're not extending or creating an object for it, it already exists in Aria Operations, you can still come in here and find that object type, like let's say it was the host system, and you could attach it and specify how these events are going to match to that object and when they should be attached. Finally, there's an option to specify if events are generated, but they're not related to the cluster or the rubric VM, do you want to just attach them to the adapter instance? This might be useful if a lot of the events are useful for logging purposes, but they don't really belong to anything that you want to monitor. Maybe they're on ports or something like that. In that case, those kind of system level, or you could have system level events, those kind of events, you might just want to have them attached to the adapter instance. But if they are generating a lot of events and you're actually not interested in having those show up at all, you can disable this so that only the events that match to objects that exist will be created and then attached to those set objects. In this case, anything extra that gets created, I want it to attach to my adapter instance. Finally, for the events, you can specify a default, very basic alert. If you do go around and choose this, you'll have to choose what type of alert it should be triggered, what should it affect, and its wait and cancel cycles. You can additionally specify some kind of recommendation. If you need to have a little bit of a handle on when the alerts are going to be triggered, like, and you kind of call out a little bit of it up here, like if a symptom needs to look for specific text in the event message, or if there are multiple scenarios like symptoms you need to have before you trigger the alert. These things you should go ahead and set up in VMware Aria Operations instead of using this feature. This will pretty much just create a one-to-one relationship between the event gets triggered and now it has an alert with it. So it may be really useful if you have an API that's returning a list of errors and you want all those errors to be alerts. It's a very simple way to kind of get that configured into the management pack. And there's many cases where that's not going to be sufficient, and you can still go ahead and define those specifically in VMware Aria Operations instead. And then once we've saved it, now we have this event that we can use, and we'll be able to see the results of it when we go ahead and perform the collection.